Hello all, we're back and just as mediocre as ever, and today we are going to be figuring out if I can beat Into the Breach without dealing any direct damage. For those few people who clicked on this video without knowing anything about the game, thank you, but also Into the Breach is a turn-based mech battler where you're told what your enemies are going to do in advance, and you have to figure out how to use your limited actions to stop them from either killing your mechs or the civilians you've been tasked with protecting. The most straightforward way of doing this is, of course, just to straight up attack and kill them, which is why what we're doing today can be considered a challenge. Now, if you have played the game before, you might already be thinking there are a couple mech squads who already specialize in dealing indirect damage, through electrified smoke and fire respectively, and you wouldn't be wrong. That's why I've decided to ban electrified smoke as well as any mech weapons that explicitly create fire. Incidental fire caused by damaged tiles that have trees on them is fine though. Overall, throughout this playthrough, I cannot attack any Vec directly using any mech weapon or pilot ability that causes direct damage, which includes using support units such as spawned tanks or the terraformer to cause damage. As I already mentioned, there's also no deliberately spreading fire or causing damage using smoke. What this means is that we'll have to rely on repositioning our enemies into the environmental hazards and getting them to attack each other in order to deal damage. And I'll explain some of the unique challenges this brings up as we come across them. I will be playing on hard difficulty, which increases the number of enemy spawns and the percentage of elite enemies, and I will also have to complete all 4 islands before attempting the final challenge. Finally, all Advanced Edition content has been enabled, since it provides more options and more varied challenges. With all that in mind, let's get into it. Since we can't deal direct damage, we're limited to almost exclusively science mechs. I've chosen the swap mech, which can switch places with any unit within range in a straight line, since this is absolutely fantastic for repositioning enemies and getting them in the way of hazards. Next up is the defense mech, which has 2 abilities. First is the ability to pull an enemy 1 square in its direction, which is useful enough on its own, but more importantly it has the ability to produce shields that will help us avoid mech and grid damage when we need to. And finally we have the exchange mech, which can take any adjacent unit and swap its place with any other unit on the board, which when combined with the fact that the other 2 units we've chosen are both flying mechs will be extremely useful. For our starting pilot I've chosen Mafan, I think that's how we pronounce it, since his ability to gain a regenerating shield every turn is pretty busted and can absolutely carry us through certain missions. With our mechs and pilot selected, it's on to the run. The islands can be tackled in any order, but since Archive is the one I'm most comfortable with and has a manageable set of Vec enemies on it right now, it's the one we go for first. Right away our strategy becomes apparent. Drop whatever enemies we can into water using our teleportation abilities and block the spawns with Mafan whenever we need to control the number of enemies on the board. Our first mission has us defending the train, and we don't run into any major trouble on this one since it is the first level. The only bit of damage we take the whole time is when we pull the final enemy into our defense mech to finish it off, which I'm not considering direct damage because we're not explicitly dealing the enemy with our weapons, and it is being bumped into another unit, which is also fine in all other cases. If for some reason you think this invalidates the run, let me know in the comments. Mission 2 has a lot more going on, with a time pod dropping in and the artillery support to defend. Normally the artillery support makes these levels a lot easier, but since we can't fire its weapon, we'll have to settle for moving it out of harm's way whenever possible. The water on this level is a lot less convenient for dumping enemies in, so we do have to work around more threats at once than we did last time, but it never really becomes too much to handle. Things look for a minute like they're going to get dicey on our final turn, but in reality it's a pretty simple solution. Of the 5 Vec on the board, 3 are attacking the exact same spot, and 1 is on fire and will die at the beginning of the turn, so it can be ignored completely. That leaves only 1 truly threatening enemy, and all it takes is to swap it out for our pilots getting ganged up on and everything turns out fine and dandy. The time pod grants us the flood drill, which turns any liquid space into a bottomless pit and also spreads the liquid to all adjacent spaces, which will definitely come in handy later on. We also use the reactor core we get to power it on. I won't be talking too much about every core we spend, since in general they'll just give us additional teleport range or more health and movement, which don't significantly change our strategy. We'll also be glossing over missions that go smoothly just like the first 2, since I want to focus in on levels where something particularly interesting happens. If for some reason you feel like watching this run in its entirety without any commentary, I've also uploaded that footage and the link is in the description. Back to the run progress, and we've got some egg sacs to destroy alongside airborne artillery support, so I'm sure you can guess where this is going. We've also got a conveniently placed pool of water in the dead center of the map, so the mission doesn't give us any trouble. Easy level, moving on. The last mission we choose on the island is even easier, since we're trending towards the perfect island bonus that you get from not failing any objectives, so I picked a mission that starts some of the buildings off with shields and also has insta-kill mines scattered all over the place. Oh, and there's water everywhere on this level too, so there's not much to talk about here either. On to the first corporate HQ, and we're facing our greatest challenge so far, a Hornet leader who cannot in any way be dropped into water or down a pit. This is going to be rough. To be honest though, staying alive isn't much of an issue, and we manage to protect our mechs in the corporate tower without any real problems. The one thing we do run into, however, is that we just don't output enough damage to take this thing down. Early methods of dealing damage to flying enemies at the moment are maneuvering them on top of spawn points and getting other enemies to attack them, and at this point all the other enemies only deal 1 damage apiece, which doesn't leave us with enough damage to get the Hornet leader killed before the time limit runs out. While we don't take any lasting damage to our prospects of winning, it does hurt a little bit to not at least get a crack at the bonus we were so close to achieving. We buy a couple of reactor cores with our reputation, and then move on to the second island. For no reason in particular, I choose RST to be our second island, because I suppose it makes as much sense to go left to right as it would to go in any other order, and things get off to a pretty rocky start here. On our first turn, I make some moves without really considering what's going to happen, and have to use my only turn reset at the very beginning, meaning that we'll be playing the rest of the mission at a disadvantage. Things don't get much better on turn 2, when I fail to properly check the attack order before making my moves, and position things so that an enemy I was counting on shielding a building from another enemy winds up dead before it serves that purpose, with the building getting leveled and costing us 2 grid power in the process. This sets us up for a final turn where I triple down on being a dumbass. Looking at a still of this, I can see exactly what I need to do. If I were to swap the Alpha Leaper with the Spiderling next to it, the Spiderling will get killed before it can attack the building, saving both the building and my exchange mech. Then, pulling the egg-laying spider out of the way of the train and swapping the Firefly at the bottom to a spot where it's no longer aimed at the train would actually get me out of here with all of my objectives completed and mechs intact. This is absolutely not what I did, and I left it up to my swap mech to deal with the spider, which is impossible because at best I can get my own mech hit by the train instead, which will still damage it and fail the objective. This could have been fixed if only I still had my reset, which I don't. Still reeling from the utter failure of that mission, I not only forget to install my new reactor core, but I also pick the Terraformer mission on instinct, which any amount of examination would reveal is a mistake. Not only can I not use the Terraformer to kill any enemies, but there's no water on the entire map here, which means we're in for a rough time. I'll play this level out in full to give a taste of what went on, and it didn't actually turn out nearly as bad as it could have. We are obviously completely unable to transform the grassland back into the desert, failing that objective, but with some finessing we do manage to keep everyone in the area alive, and a lucky time pod drop means that we're not leaving completely empty-handed. That could have gone way worse, but choosing it was still a mistake. The next level is a true gift in that it has enough water to make Bobby Boucher blush, and also a seismic event happening that creates rifts in the ground for us to push extra enemies into. This provides a lovely reprieve from the difficulty of the last couple levels. We make our way through here with zero issues whatsoever. I don't much like our options for the fourth mission here, since knocking the mites off of mechs requires doing a point of damage to an unshielded mech, and that's obviously problematic for our team. I've also always hated protecting the volatile Vec, so we're left taking the easy mission for babies with defense shields again. Just like last time we pulled the freebie level off without a hitch, and move on to Corporate HQ. This island has a blobber leader who can be really annoying depending on where it flings its blobs, since they can block our paths and threaten to blow up multiple things at once. Blobbers, like all other ground-bound enemy types, do have one crippling weakness though: bottomless pits. With that in mind, we pull the blobber into the sea and use the flood drill to create a hole for it to fall into, killing the biggest threat instantly. We also teleport its blob into the sea itself to stop it from blowing up a couple buildings, which does unfortunately leave the Alpha Firefly open to attacking a building itself. The building doesn't come through on its resist chance, unfortunately, but it's a minor setback in order to get such a clean kill on the leader, and we're set up for success moving forward. The rest of the mission goes as you might expect, especially with the buildings being neatly arranged into 2 rows on either side, limiting the number of them that can be attacked at once by these enemies. In the end, the rest of the mission goes off without a hitch, letting us buy another couple reactor cores and move on to Pinnacle. Pinnacle is what I would expect to be our easiest island of the run, since its unique features generally involve ice and incapacitating enemies, which fits very neatly into our direct damage-free lifestyle. The only thing not to like about this island is that sometimes the water is iced over, which can make it slightly harder to dump enemies into. Our first mission here starts off with a whole lot going on, since we not only begin with 3 objectives, but we also get a time pod dropped in. Luckily for us, one of the objectives is breaking the buildings out of ice, which serves double duty as a protective layer, providing us with a bit of buffer in terms of what actually needs to be saved off the start. Even though we could have had a couple of extra buildings broken out on turn 1, I opt to remove a couple big threats, dropping 2 alphas into their icy aquatic tombs, as well as picking up the time pod so we have one less thing to worry about for the rest of the time. Next turn I just opt to limit spawns and get an extra building broken out, which sets us up for this absolute beauty of a turn, where we block all possible spawns and break out the final 3 buildings we needed all at once. This lets us take a relatively easy win on the first turn, which I'll still show because it's always satisfying watching beetles run themselves into water. Our next mission has cryo mines lying around, which are always useful. While there isn't very much water on this level for killing, the mines do a good job of limiting where the vet can go, especially once they get frozen and block off even more of the area. So while it may look like something of a clusterfuck, we're pretty easily able to keep things contained and don't come across any particularly difficult situations. Next up is the opposite of what we usually try to do, where we have to limit how many enemies we kill, and we also get a time pod dropped on our heads for good measure. Time pods aren't much trouble for a squad with so much mobility and teleportation ability, so we managed to grab it on our way to teleporting the Alpha Moth into a space where it can't attack anymore. Big brain play of the map is maneuvering our defense mech into a position where the robot that's about to get broken out of the ice can bump into it and die, eliminating an additional threat we would have had to deal with on our next turn. This is the most interesting turn of the battle though, and the rest of it is the usual rigmarole of blocking spawns and landing enemies in spots where they can't attack, with the only difference being that we don't really want them to kill each other this time. What's more notable, though, is that the time pod drops the Vec Hormones weapon, which makes enemies deal more damage to each other, which will really come in handy for the rest of the run. The next level is another easy one, since it only has one objective, and also because the gimmick of the level means that if you're careful, you only ever have to deal with 2 or 3 enemies at a time. And for the third time, we take the baby level heading into the corporate HQ, and for the second time this run, we also have the perfect island bonus intact as we do so. Here we have the Beetle Leader, and I think you can probably guess how we're going to start this level off. Yep. It should come as no surprise after that excellent first turn that we managed to pull this one out with 0 issues whatsoever. We do spend a reset in the process, but that was more to just improve an already acceptable turn than it was to fix an actual mistake. This means we end Pinnacle in great shape, with full power, 24% grid defense, and nearly fully upgraded mechs. And this is also why I mandated finishing all 4 islands, because this is absolutely the point in the run where I'd normally just go to the Vec Hive, but we need to get through another island first to earn that right, and also to make the final challenge a little bit harder. Finally, we hit up Detritus, at the peak of our powers and ready to fuck shit up. Unfortunately, fucking shit up is exactly what we do right off the start. In a not particularly shocking turn of events, this is another train mission, and this island has one of the hardest enemies for us to deal with. Burrowers cannot be pushed or teleported, at the drawback of retreating underground whenever they are damaged. Unfortunately for our playstyle, they are quite difficult to damage straight up, and this poses some unique challenges. Challenges so unique in fact, that I completely forget about a moth that's targeting the power generator and it gets destroyed on the first turn. Then bad gets worse as I miscalculate how a burrower's attack is going to affect the train. I shielded the train, hoping that this will deflect its attack, but as the attack affects both spaces the train is occupying, the game treats this as each space being attacked in turn, meaning the first space attacked removes the shield from the train and the second is then damaged. Granted, this is a very niche scenario that I just haven't encountered in all my time playing this game, and maybe couldn't have seen coming, but it still stings a little bit. In the grand scheme of things, as long as I survive this island with enough reputation to ensure that I have full grid power, things will be alright, but I'd rather look clever in my internet video where I play this game, and this isn't really helping out with that. For our next level, we're guaranteed to fail at least one objective, on account of having to knock the mites off our mechs and it being impossible to do so without killing our most important crew member. We do have to give up a building at one point in this mission, but overall limit the enemy spawns and keep them localized in the bottom of the screen well enough that we can gain 2 grid power and undo the damage that we just incurred. In a startling turn of events, I choose the baby mode single objective mission 3rd instead of 4th, and in keeping with tradition it's by far easier than the other missions we've undertaken on this island. We do get a time pod, though at this point I actually prefer to keep my already fully leveled pilots, and the reactor core only helps us beef up our exchange mech's health a little more, which is minimally useful. For once I decide to actually look at the maps the final few missions take place on, and there's only one that has enough liquid for us to dump enemies into, so naturally that's the one I choose. I do regularly forget to take the conveyors fully into account on these levels, so let's see if that bites me in the ass here. The answer is yes. When I don't forget to protect a building that gets attacked by a moth after it slides on the conveyor, costing me 2 grid power and another few credibility points. And that's even before I entirely space out on the fact that my swap mech is on another conveyor and rams into yet another building. We should still be able to finish the island at full power, since we have nothing better to spend our reputation on, but my performance on this island really isn't encouraging as we bear towards the final missions of the game. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. First we need to defeat the centipede leader. 3 guesses on how we go about doing that. Repetitive but effective maneuvers aside, this level is a success with no major challenges or hiccups, which lets us rebuild our grid power and head on into the volcanic hive at full strength. Let's see if we can't get this done. The first phase of the fight is pretty challenging, but it's nothing we can't overcome. We do need to use a rewind to figure out this second turn of the battle, but we do also luck out a little bit later with the Hornet choosing to sit on a spot where it will get hit with a fireball, which lets us untangle this little knot down at the bottom where everyone has decided to gang up on one single power pylon. This lets us move on to the second phase of the fight with full power, and I'm feeling really confident that we can win at this point. Killing the leader down here is never too difficult if you have the kind of relocation weapons that we do, since it's really not too hard to move this beetle over to one of the rockfall spaces where it will get insta-killed. We managed to kill 2 of the enemies straight up and block a spawn, which is a pretty decent start. What comes on the next turn is a classic blunder though, since I decided to gamble on my bomb taking 3 damage from a firefly, assuming that I will be able to protect it for the final 2 turns from taking any hits. In doing so though, I failed to remember that the cyan will do an additional damage at the beginning of the turn before it gets killed by the hazard. My heart absolutely drops when this happens, since I honestly don't remember the last time I lost the bomb on this level and think maybe the run is over. Mercifully though, our pal Jessica Kern sends us another bomb, with the consequence being that it will take a couple extra turns to prime, meaning we have to hold out even longer. Having not taken any grid damage yet, this should be doable, but it does add an extra layer of pressure to the encounter. Things are looking even better at the end of the next turn after we manage to eliminate all enemies on screen and block 2 spawns, though our exchange mech is now looking a little bit worse for wear. On the next turn we block some more spawns and deal with most of the threats, though we do have to allow a crab a chance to attack a building. This is when we get our first building that resists damage of the entire run, however, so now we're sitting here at 100% power with only 2 turns left to survive and things are looking good. There's not too much happening on the next turn, so we turn aside all threats and set up for the final turn of the run in almost can't lose position. On setup for the final turn, we're absolutely guaranteed a win, since the most we can lose without trying to get ourselves killed is 4 grid power and 1 mech, which absolutely will not fail the run. This leads me to mess around a bit, and I decided that I primarily want to win the run with full grid power, even though nothing I do in this turn matters in the slightest, but I'm also admittedly curious what happens if I end the game with my exchange mech dead, since this pilot has the invulnerable power, which lets him survive even when his mech gets busted. He does not in fact get to live, which is a shame, but we weren't picking him as our time traveler anyways, so it's all moot. The Renfield bomb goes off and our surviving pilots portal out, proving that yes, you can beat into the breach without dealing any direct damage. All in all, that was a surprisingly successful first try. Most of the biggest obstacles were of my own doing, though I have to admit that having the flood drill did make many of the leaders a lot easier than they can be otherwise. I never really doubted this was doable at all, but we never even dipped below half grid power or lost a pilot until the very last turn on purpose, which I think really speaks to the amazing balance of powers and choices you can make in this game, that it's beatable on hard without directly attacking even a single enemy. Maybe I should try it out on Unfair next time. If you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a like or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you have any ideas for runs in this or any other game, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new and interesting ideas. I hope you like this one, and thanks for sticking around until the end. See you next time.